Welcome, everybody. This is the KubeVirt community meeting, May 5th, 2019. Red Hat Summit is underway, as well as a public holiday in Italy and I believe Israel. Czech Republic and Israel. So it may be a light agenda because we have a lack of attendees this week. But first note, node drain and live migration, and I'll turn it over to David Vossel.
Okay, yeah. I can't remember what Roman talked about previously, so I'll give an update here on what we're working on. We want to be able to trigger a live migration of virtual machines when we are draining a node. So when we put a node into maintenance mode, or we want to take all the pods off of it and move it, we want to automatically have virtual machines that are capable of migrating to migrate instead of actually terminating the virtual machine, starting it somewhere else. So we're looking at ways of integrating that in with things like the client-side kubectl drain functionality, as well as some, we have some back-end server-side functions or operators, excuse me, that are attempting to do the same thing as kubectl drain. One issue that we've hit and that we're investigating right now is that we're using something called pod disruption budget to prevent the drain from taking out the virtual machine until after it's migrated. So it prevents us from taking the virtual machine's pod down until after it's migrated. There's an issue right now where that pod disruption budget, which blocks the eviction of the pod, it's actually blocking the draining entirely, at least on the Kubernetes versions I've been testing on, because it's counting a completed pod as part of that pod disruption budget. So it's now allowing us to delete a completed pod because it's still counting it as part of this minimum number of pods that must be available in our pod disruption budget. So it's something we're tracking right now, and that's about it for the update. So the goal here is for us to be able to drain nodes and perform live migrations. We're really, really close to having that work perfectly.
Well, thank you, David. And by the way, within the last 10 minutes, this was just demoed at Red Hat Summit, and it did work there. So, but of course, that was using a slightly older approach, if I understand. But are there any questions? All right. And that was the only agenda item in advance for the agenda and notes today. Is there anything else anybody would like to bring up?
I just want to note the gathering at KubeCon. So we've sent around an email. If you plan to attend, please just give us a heads up so that we've got enough snacks to snack. That would be it from my side.
Awesome, thank you. And with that, are there any other notes that we need to bring up for the open floor or general session? All right, well, go on, please.
Hey, this is David Benoit. I'm on the multi-arch team at Red Hat, and I've been looking at this issue a little bit and talking to Fabian about that. Let me just post it in the chat. Specifically, it's KubeVirt on PowerPC, Little Endian, and I haven't had a chance to look into it too deeply yet. But I'm curious, has anyone else heard from the poster of this bug, who I think he's from IBM, right? My biggest question is, do we know if the containers that he's using are in the KubeVirt Docker Hub, or do we know if he's building them locally?
I'm pretty sure. Hey, this is Fabian. Hey, David. Hey. So yeah, thanks for raising it. So I'm pretty sure it's not in Docker Hub because he would have needed to reach out to one of us owners of the Docker Hub account. So I guess he's building that locally, or in a different registry or different org on Docker Hub.
Great. So now, in terms of actually going about and building all of the containers for KubeVirt, is there documentation available for how to go about that?
I guess David or Stu might have more information about that.
So the question specifically is there documentation covering building your own containers for KubeVirt?
Yes.
I'd have to check. I don't actually know. In general, when you're using the development environment, which most of us do, that's kind of done for you. But in terms of building out general containers, I don't know if that actually does exist, and that would actually be something very helpful.
All right. Now, when you say the development environment, do you mean? I'm not familiar with that. I'm sort of new to KubeVirt.
Sorry, I was on mute. So what we do right now is in the Git tree, we have cluster build scripts that will use it sets up a local environment using Docker and machines within that. So there's all sorts of specialized hooks to build the containers, move them into namespaces that Docker can see, and actually set up Kubernetes in a controlled fashion inside these virtual machines. So it is a nested virt situation. But it's those build scripts that actually do that. But as far as doing something where it's just free form and you're building your own containers, I'm not 100% sure we have documentation for that.
So
I just want to leave one more hint. So that is today in the development environment, all containers are built using Bazel. So Bazel is probably the best place to look for how you can add your own containers or your own architectures. Because I know that Nitcon, right, the GitHub person, he had to do some changes to the livered container at least to get that built for PowerPC for 64LE. And maybe even Bazel has support for multiple architectures, and that would my understanding of the how to address or move forward with that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a follow-up question, does the when you deploy KubeVirt just from the development environment or from the Git repository, does the default deploy whichever I guess when you do kube control create -f kubevirt.yaml, does that build the containers?
No.
Okay.
So what happens right now is Fabian had said we use Bazel to actually build the containers, and they're pushed to wherever is when you do, because you can actually do a Bazel build separate from a push. And when you do that image push, that's what actually moves the containers themselves into, at least in the development environment, into a container or to the Docker container namespace so that it can be seen by Kubernetes, so that when you actually run, because full circle to answer your question, which is what happens when you do a kube control create -f and the KubeVirt YAML, it actually has a pointer in there to what Docker images, or at least the prefix that should be used, and that's where the images are pulled from. And so, because we're using the operator, as you had mentioned, and so that's how you connect those dots. Is Bazel actually moves the images to where they need to be in advance of Kubernetes looking for them in that particular location, because that's what the operator said to do.
Oh, cool. All right. So it would be kind of a two-step process. The first one would be using Bazel to build the containers and push them to a local or some a registry somewhere, and then point the kube control create.
Yes, I would actually call it a three-step process, because build is separate from push, or you can control it that way, because it sounds like you're going to need to push these images to somewhere that's non-standard, at least.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, and to close the loop, the standard place, at least for our dev environments, when we're just doing like make target builds, is we stand up a local registry. So it's pushing to a local registry by default.
All right. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Hey,
really
do you hear me? This is Mark. I just posted something to the chat, which worked 2 weeks ago for me, for pushing the images to your private Docker Hub account. So that should basically work. It includes a step for checking out a branch based on a pull request. So maybe that is at least a start.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, I'm frantically typing to try and catch up with all this. So I think that pretty much covers that, or does that answer your question? Okay, I think so. Are there any other topics that we want to raise today? Cool. Well, thanks everybody, and we will see you next week. Have a great one.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.